it is a personal honor for me to be introducing our speaker, because if it were not for he, I would probably not be standing here in front of you today. He instilled in me at a young age the passion for politics and the debate and clash of ideas that is associated with it. As a young child and a young boy, when growing up, instead of staying up late to watch a movie on TV or Saturday Night Live, my father and my sister and I would stay up till 11:30 at night and watch a show called Crossfire. Now, my mother, incidentally, who was in charge of getting me up in the morning and getting us off to school, was quite pleased a few years later when they moved to the 7:30 p.m. time slot. Watching Pat and Tom Braden and later Michael Kinsley spar back and forth on issues such as welfare reform, national defense, and foreign policy fascinated me so much that that's what I do for a living now. It is a personal honor for me to be here. Victor Hugo comes to mind because he once wrote that ideas are more powerful than all the armies in the world. Ideas are what the Georgia Public Policy Foundation is all about. And there are few men who are more adept at forcefully and eloquently defending the ideas that our country was founded upon than Pat Buchanan. There are two things that I admire most about our speaker, and these two things make him unique among politicians. Number one, no matter what the latest public opinion poll says, no matter what the political experts are saying, no matter who his audience is, Pat Buchanan always stays with his principles, and that's a good thing in these times. Secondly, no other person in the history of the United States that I am aware of has mentioned my hometown of Ellijay, Georgia, not once, but twice on national television at a Republican National Convention. And most of you may know that Ronald Reagan earned the nickname the Great Communicator in the 1980s. And what you may not know is behind some of President Reagan's most memorable and powerful speeches was his speechwriter, Pat Buchanan. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and a privilege today to introduce to you candidate for President of the United States, Patrick Buchanan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kelly. Good heavens, a young fellow in preteen years watching Crossfire, I think that almost constitutes child abuse on your parents' part. I thought they had a V-chip for those things, so you could keep the kids from watching them. I really appreciate being here today, and we just came in from Iowa, where it's down around 0, and there's ice storms all over the roads, and I think maybe you folks ought to move your primary up a little bit so we can get down to places like this. Let me talk today, and I'd like to take a number of your questions about the latest decision by the President, which has been basically affirmed by Senator Dole and the leaders of the Republican Party, to put an American army into Bosnia, and why I feel that's a mistake, even though once the troops go in, every American, I believe, is going to stand behind them and pray that they come home both safely and successfully. Now, I have said that there's no vital American interest in Bosnia that justifies the loss of a single American life. It is a violent ethnic and civil conflict. The roots go back for centuries, even before Plymouth Rock. An American army ought not to be in there. And I don't believe Mr. Clinton's made the case why they should go. But much beyond Bosnia, there's something driving American foreign policy now that I think is out of sync with the America of 1995. I think we have a foreign policy that's rooted in inertia and nostalgia for a period that has passed. Now, in this period, the Cold War era, I was proud to play a role with 3 American presidents. We attended many summit meetings. In that Cold War, I supported foreign aid. In that Cold War, I supported an aggressive foreign policy to take advantages of weaknesses in the Soviet Empire. We supported aid to the Contras in Nicaragua, aid to the Angolan freedom fighters, Jonas Savimbi, aid to the Afghan Mujahideen. And the purpose of that was, I believe that our country, and I still believe we were correct, was engaged in a global struggle, a war that had been declared upon us by the empire of Lenin and Stalin, and that we not only had to resist, but we had to win that war. We had to persevere over a long haul. And when Ronald Reagan came into office, and I went into the White House with him, he pursued the Reagan Doctrine, which was basically to exploit the weaknesses of the Soviet Empire in the Third World and to put the empire on the defensive with an arms buildup, with a propaganda offensive in the best sense of that term, with a philosophical offensive, and basically by undercutting with wars of national liberation the entire Soviet Empire. That was a justified and wise policy, and it succeeded beyond our wildest dreams when the Soviet Empire collapsed. But I think many of my colleagues and friends and rivals, like not Phil Gramm so much, but I would say Bob Dole and Dick Lugar, are living in the past. This Cold War with the Soviet Empire no longer exists in the form that it did. The Soviet Empire has collapsed. The Soviet Union has broken apart. All of the 6 captive nations of Eastern Europe are free. Yugoslavia has broken up. The Soviet Union itself has broken up into 15 nations. The Baltic republics, the captive nations we used to pray about and worry about, are suddenly free. And I think our foreign policy leadership in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are basically living in the past. As I said, a politics of nostalgia, a foreign policy of nostalgia and inertia, continuing to go in the same direction and not thinking anew. Mr. Lincoln said, as our situation is new, we must think and act anew. So this is where I get the reputation, I guess they say, well, Pat's just an isolationist, or Pat's a protectionist. And they use the pejorative terms of an earlier era to describe our foreign and defense policy. Let me talk a little bit about it and what I think America needs to do. I think we need a wholesale review of our foreign policy and our defense policy, and I think we need to take a look at our own society and what's happened to America. We are now, this great country of ours, $5 trillion in debt. There are 2 fundamental components of that national debt. One is World War II and the Cold War, the hot wars in Korea and Vietnam, hundreds of billions in foreign aid, trillions in defense spending for the Cold War, which had to be done and which was successful. The other component is the Great Society welfare state, $5 trillion, done perhaps for good motives, but a total debacle and a total failure. This is why America's $5 trillion in debt. And we got to realize we're in a new era. And old allies and friends like Germany and Europe and Japan are now rivals and competitors of this country. And even as we maintain our Cold War defenses and NATO defenses, they are capturing American markets left, right, and center. America's manufacturing base now is there are more people working for government in the United States of America today than in manufacturing. Take a look at mighty unions like the steel workers, the auto workers, the mine workers of America. They're shadows of their former selves. America once produced 40% of all the world produced. It's now closer to 20%. And we are pursuing policies, I believe, as though this is 1950. And Bosnia is a fragment of that, or a part of that policy. So here's what I'm arguing for. It's a brand new foreign policy and a new trade policy which recognize the world as it is, I believe, and which put the national economic interests of this country first. American businesses, American farmers, and American workers. Now, this is what I call the new nationalism, or a new economic patriotism. And let me outline a foreign policy that is consistent with that. I think we've got to say to the Europeans, our NATO allies, that look, enough is enough. Today, this country, you know how many countries we're committed to defend? 14 NATO countries in Europe, Japan and Korea, the ANZUS Pact nations, Australia and New Zealand, the CETO Pact nations. We got a moral commitment to Israel. We're reducing our defenses to pre-Pearl Harbor level. At the same time, there are people in Washington who want to extend NATO war commitments to Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, some even to the Baltic republics and Ukraine. They want to put troops in Bosnia. They got them in Macedonia. They got them in Haiti. They want to put them on the Golan Heights. This is imperial overstretch. What we're engaged in right now, my friends, is the same kind of foreign and trade policy that sank the British Empire. It sank the British Empire. Between 1865 and 1914, Great Britain practiced a policy of free trade while America was protectionist with a 40% tariff. In those years, the United States, which began with half of Britain's production, ended with more than twice of Britain's production. Germany, which started way behind, wasn't even a nation, adopted the American policy, and by 1914 she was outproducing Great Britain. Then in 1914, when the war started, Great Britain was the mightiest empire on earth. 30 years later, because of her interventionist policies, Great Britain was living off American food stamps. Now she produces 3% of the world's produce. And I believe my friends up there in Washington, D.C., whom I worked with and collaborated with during the Cold War, I think they're taking this country down the same path as Great Britain. And I think you read the Wall Street Journal today in the B section, I believe, all these multinational corporations. They're moving all their new investment capital into third world countries and especially China, because that's the future and that's where the wages are low and that's where they want to place their manufacturing. So let me lay down just some brief outlines of what I think is a foreign policy and a trade policy for our time, which will keep this country the greatest nation on earth for the 21st century and not let us be eclipsed, as we're going to be eclipsed by countries like China if we don't do it. First, I think the United States should move to what might be called an updated Nixon doctrine, and that is the United States should stand as the strategic reserve of Western civilization, not the frontline troops. Under the Nixon doctrine, which Mr. Nixon enunciated when I was in the White House at Guam in 1969, he said, henceforth, foreign countries will provide the troops for their defense, but the arsenal of democracy will be open to them. They can purchase the weapons from the United States of America for their defense, but we're not putting the troops on the front line as we did every time in Korea and Vietnam. I think that is one idea. I think we need the Germans and the Japanese to pay more for their national defense and buy more weapons from the United States of America. I think we need to look to a day when we can bring our troops off the front lines in Korea. Why should American soldiers be first to die in a second Korean War 45 years after the first Korean War came to an end? I think we need to bring our troops back basically to the United States of America, not have them intervening in places like Bosnia. I think we need to tell these countries that they are going to have to build up their own defense forces. You know, people say, well, that's isolationism, Pat. Dwight Eisenhower in 1951 said, if American troops are still in Europe 10 years from now, he was Supreme NATO Commander, I will have failed. In 1961, he told John F. Kennedy, start bringing the troops home or you're going to wind up with welfare dependencies in Europe. And that's what we got now. Here's a continent of 300 million Europeans, rich as we are, more populous than we are, technologically advanced, and they're calling on the Americans, 250 million Americans, to defend them from 150 million Russians who are mired in poverty and despair. So this is the idea, I would say, with a defense policy and a foreign policy. Make America the strategic reserve of Western civilization, but these countries start paying for their own defense and providing the troops for their own defense. Our trade policy should be free trade with free and fair traders, like the Canadians, like the British, like the Australians. With regard to a country like China, China today gets more investment, almost as much investment capital from abroad as the United States of America. It is booming. China has a 40% tariff on American goods. It steals our intellectual property. It runs a trade surplus of $40 billion by selling us 5 times as much as they buy from us. And when they buy Boeing aircraft, they demand you put the tail assembly plant in mainland China. This is what China is doing to America right now, and what Japan is doing to America is what Germany and the United States did to Great Britain. So I think we need a trade hawk in the White House who tells the Chinese, if you put 40% tariffs on our goods, we're putting 40% tariffs on your goods. Secondly, we're not going to let you do what the Japanese are doing to us. Run a $40 billion, up to $50 billion next year trade surplus at our expense. Mickey Cantor's standards say that every $1 billion in exports equals 20,000 jobs. That means this country's $200 billion merchandise trade deficit equals 4 million lost manufacturing jobs. That's one of the reasons why you got the problems you do in the cities of America and the rural areas, why you got a two-tier society developing, is because American workers no longer have the kind of good jobs they used to have when they came out of high school. Real wages are down 25% from what they used to be when I got out of high school, when you got out of high school. So these are some of the ideas, as I say, we Americans got to wake up and realize we're in a brand new world and stop acting like it's the Cold War and stop acting like we can go around the world and do what we want the way we did in the 1950s, that we got all the wealth in the world, we can throw open our markets to the Japanese and Germans because we need them as allies. I think we've got to start looking more toughly at these countries, and we've got to start looking out better for the national interest of the United States of America. That's why they call me a protectionist and an isolationist, I suppose. But that basically is the outline of what I believe this country needs in the way of a brand new foreign policy and a new defense policy and a new trade policy. And that's what I'm pursuing. And I want to thank you all for the opportunity and for giving me a hearing. We appreciate it. Good to see my old friend Joe from LJ here again today.
Tell them how you plan to win the election and your feelings on capital gains and estate taxes.
All right. With regard to capital gains taxes, well, estate taxes, I think the estate taxes ought to be eliminated on all family farms, family businesses, under $5 million. It is ridiculous to go out to these farms in Iowa. They've been put together for generations, and the father and mother have worked hard to hand it down to their son, and the son's got to sell off half of the farm or the entire farm to pay the inheritance taxes. Same with small businesses. The idea of small businesses being kept in the family is a good, healthy, conservative thing for America. With regard to capital gains taxes, any capital gains taxes, I think long-term capital gains should not be taxed. Capital gains in new businesses and that kind of investment should not be taxed. As the ones that should be taxed, I think, if you're speculating in currencies every day, and that's not real capital gains to me. But real capital investment, if we want more investment and more savings in America, what sense does it make to tax savings and investment at the highest rate in the Western industrial world? If we're competing with these countries, it doesn't make any sense. So we're going to have the lowest rate of taxation on savings, investment, work in the entire Western industrial world. I think that's the way to make America the enterprise zone of the world. Now let me talk a little bit about how we propose to win this. We're doing pretty well. We're running second down here in Georgia, even though I haven't been here, and folks have suggested a correlation between that. As long as I don't show up, my negatives go down. But I'm not too worried about that because my negatives are mighty low compared to Newt's. Newt's now beating me out in that department. But let me tell you how we propose to win it and how we have to win it. Phil Gramm, let me tell you a story. Phil Gramm, about June, right after July, he went on CNN. He said, Pat Buchanan isn't going nowhere because he's out of money. He's only got $26,000. And so I called up my campaign manager, my sister, Bay, and I said, Bay, are you holding out on me? We got $26,000? Anyhow, I said, what is with Phil? He reads my Federal Election Commission reports, and I don't read them. I never read them. But anyhow, comes the third quarter, and we raised $2 million in the third quarter, and we outraised Phil Gramm. And comes the fourth quarter, and in submissions for matching funds in the fourth quarter, we've submitted more than Bob Dole. It looks like now, by February 1, we're going to have $5 million in matching funds. We expect to raise $2.5 million. And just when those primaries are starting, we expect to have $7 million to handle our advertising budget and the rest of it. So we got as much money as Phil Gramm. We don't have as much as Bob Dole to spend. We are sitting pretty when it comes to that. We're going to be fully financed. How do we win it? I'll tell you what's coming up first, Joe, is there's an Alaska straw poll. I went up to Alaska, went to Ketchikan, Sitka, Juneau, and Fairbanks up there, visited the folks up on the pipeline, a few of our voters up there, and went over to Anchorage. And I went up there, and they're having a straw poll 27th, 29th of January. And they say, why are you here? I said, I'm coming up here. One reason I'm coming up here in the nice weather is once I'm here, they're all going to follow me. And old Phil's up there last weekend, and Bob's going. And so here's what we got to do. We want to do well in the January straw poll in Alaska. Then on February 6th comes Louisiana. I waited until everybody took the pledge not to go to Louisiana out in Iowa. And then I said, I'm not taking it. I'm going into Louisiana. So Phil Gramm has Louisiana. He thought he's got a lock on 21 delegates, uncontested. So we are now going to Louisiana again. I was there last Sunday. I'll be there tomorrow. And we got 3 days in, and we're going to go in and we're going to fight for those delegates in Louisiana. We're well positioned there because the expectations for Phil are sky high. Charlie Black said, we got all 21 delegates, we'll carry him into Iowa. Now we're going to go in and fight him for him, right in his own backyard. And if we make a strong showing against Phil in his own backyard, that will give us tremendous momentum. The press will be down there. I talked to Jack Germain, my confederate on McLaughlin Group, and I was in New Hampshire it was noon, and Jack's having the Bloody Mary up there. I said, a little early, Jack. But he said, you're going to go into, I said, I got a story for you. I'm going to wait until they all say they're not going into Louisiana, then I'm going. And he said, you're going to be a hero to the press. He says, because New Orleans got the best restaurants in the country. So we go down to Louisiana. If we can just, Joe, do well down there, if we can grab some delegates out of there, people will say Buchanan went into his backyard and he grabbed delegates right out of Phil Gramm's pocket. And that'll be a tremendous story. And that will give us momentum going into Iowa, which is our toughest state. And if we can come in strong in the top 3, and we come in strong, we don't have to beat Bob Dole. All we got to have is the reporters say, Buchanan started with nothing. He was the last man in, and he did well. We did well in the straw poll. We come out of there with that momentum, we can win New Hampshire. If we win New Hampshire, it'll be a firestorm in this country. I guarantee it. You know, I tell the folks the last time when I went to New Hampshire that we came out of New Hampshire after 10 weeks, every single day up there virtually, we came out with 37% against the President of the United States. In 10 weeks' time, coming off a television talk show. And we came down to Georgia, and even though I hadn't visited Georgia, I think except to change planes in Atlanta, we got 37% again against the President of the United States, and they threw everything at us. Why? Because the country was looking for something fresh and new and different. All of a sudden, they spotted it when they read the story out of New Hampshire. If we break out of New Hampshire, 1 week later is Arizona, and that's winner take all. Gramm and Dole and Buchanan will be out there, and Forbes, probably because he got so much money, he's going to survive and go out there. And whoever wins Arizona is going to be the front runner for the Republican nomination. And if Bob Dole gets beat in New Hampshire, I mean, if he's wounded in Iowa and wounded again in New Hampshire, I think it could collapse because the thing Bob Dole's got going for him is the expectations. People think he's going to win. I have yet to meet a voter who says, you know, Pat, I'm not for you, I'm for Bob Dole because I can't wait for the Dole administration. All these great things we're going to do for America under the Dole administration. It's more a note of resignation. They say, I'm for Dole. And there's not that enthusiasm. And I know when that enthusiasm hits, there's nothing like it in politics. So that's the way we plan to do it. And as I say, it will ignite down here in Georgia. I know it will. I mean, we're already, as I say, we're running second. And we haven't even been here. Is there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Republicans do to put out a more unified message. Every time you turn on television, you hear some Democrats, they want to cut $240 billion out of Medicare to give a tax break to the rich.
Tax break to the rich.
Yeah, totally false. How come the Republicans can't put out a good unified message?
Well, one reason that the Democrats do it, I can tell you what they're doing. They're sitting in the Roosevelt room just as we used to sit there. And we say, here's what we say. Everybody says the same thing, you know. They ask you, you know, how do you feel about the, how do you feel about the hurricane down in Florida? You say the Republicans are going to cut, are going to give a tax break to the rich, and they're cutting Medicare. Every time respond, same message, and it's a very potent message. And it's a very potent message. And the fact when you get the presidency, you can do that. You can keep it focused. You come out of the White House, and you can speak with one voice. We got a cacophony of voices up on the Hill. We got Bob Dole, we got Newt, we got the others. And we have not done a good job, quite frankly, in defending what they're doing now. And I believe it's because we've gotten away. First, we got on to they should not have made the battle over Medicare when it first went down there. I think they should have made it over something like foreign aid. Say, we want him to, we're going to end foreign aid. And let Bill Clinton defend that. I'm going to shut down the government because I want to defend foreign aid. Instead, they put it Medicare, which is a very popular thing for Clinton. And Clinton is very focused, and he's handled this very well, and we got a bunch of different voices. And in a sense, it's because Clinton is being demagogic about it, no doubt about it. He seized it, he's targeted it, but the Republicans have not got a single group together up on the Hill. I don't know why they haven't joined and come back with a single hard message. I mean, the only message they kept saying is, we're not cutting Medicare, we're cutting the rate of growth. And that's not as simple and clear as they're cutting Medicare and they're giving a tax break to the rich. But if we get the White House, you can do that. You can focus that message tremendously well from there. And we did it, of course, with Ronald Reagan and with Richard Nixon even. And it's easy to do when you go out there that podium. It's the greatest podium on earth. Yes, sir.
Do you support the current efforts to shift more and more federal programs back to the state level, such as welfare and benefits?
I really believe that we, as I've talked about, the Great Society's got to be downsized, and your roadmap is the 10th Amendment. And I think if you take education and welfare and crime, I think these are basically state and local responsibilities and duties. And I would send the block grants back to the states with virtually no strings attached. But then I would tell the states, look, since you all just sending the money to us and we're packaging it up and send it back to you, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're going to phase out these block grants and take them down to zero over a period of time. And you're going to have complete responsibility for all of these. I mean, you're a state of the union. You got your own measure of sovereignty. The Constitution on the 10th Amendment says this is your duty and responsibility, and you're going to carry it out. But there are conservatives, and I agree with them, who say once it gets to the state level, you got to start downsizing that giant state government as well, because they've ballooned and grown. You know, I was using a statistic not too long ago. When I was growing up, my father had 9 kids, and around 1950, and the federal income tax take of the average American family was 2%. Today it is 25%. You add state and local taxes, it is 38%. This is the economic pressure that is driving women into the job market, a lot of whom don't want to go, who've still got small children at home. It is the tremendous burden on families, one of the things that's keeping them from rising up further into the middle class. In order to get that tax burden down, you got to get the government spending burden down. You got to get both of them down. And it's the best pro-family policy, or one of the best things you can do at the federal level in terms of a pro-family policy, is get that burden of the federal government and the consumption of family wealth, stop consuming it at the federal level and the state level and the local level to the degree you can. Get government downsized, get that tax burden downsized. And I'm committed to doing that, and since I don't have much of a vested interest in any of those policies up there in Washington, I think I'm well positioned to do it. Yes, sir.
Do you think Newt can survive the ethics charges that have been leveled against him?
Newt survive them? He's going to, I mean, I've just seen some new things in the papers today, and they're getting all these letters from individuals who said, I'll contribute, you know, Newt, and we need some help on this. And I think this, I hope he does. I mean, this is 99%. Bonnier's out to get him. The Democrats are out to get him. There's a real sense of let's get him for what he did to right, and let's get Newt because he's Newt. And let's get the Republicans, and there's a real, I mean, it's a sense, I remember seeing it with Nixon. I mean, they wanted to kill Nixon, you know. They'd use anything they could to get him. And they'll use anything to get Newt. And I don't know. I think he's going to be, given all that what I've seen, if there's something to it, I think he's going to be lucky to get out of there without some letter of censure or something. That's off the record, but I hope he does. But I think just from what I've seen, I don't know the validity of some of these, but the FEC's put out some stuff that's looks like he's got a little bit of a problem with the state-local go-pack involving itself in federal elections to a pretty big degree, and maybe in his own election. So it's going to be a terrible distraction for him. And I think a lot of things Newt has done, he's got energy and drive and brains, and he's a real asset to the party, but he's got some problems, and it's regrettable. Yes, sir.
Say you're in favor of sending broadcast taxes. So the fundamental question is tax policy. Why do we decide that the government has the right to collect the taxes and send the money back? Why collect the taxes at all when the state's collecting taxes?
Well, see, I agree with you, but here's the thing. This is an interim measure. For example, let's take primary, secondary education. The Department of Education spends about $35 billion. I think the student loan program's got to be kept at the federal level because you got student loan here guaranteed and he uses it at Princeton. But primary and secondary education, say that's $15 billion. What you do is you can't just put it through cold turkey because a lot of cities and states have come to depend on it. So what you do is you're telling you, look, you're getting back this coming year the same amount you got last year, no cost of living increase, but that's going to gradually go down to zero to the point where you're going to have to raise the taxes yourself to pay for it. But I don't think you can put the states through cold turkey. I mean, you can't, if you take the $15 billion and you say you're getting zero this year, I think a lot of communities that have come to depend on it would almost go belly up. And so I think you got to give them some time to adjust. I mean, it's like when we cut out federal revenue sharing. We didn't just take it from $4 billion to zero, we took it down gradually. And I think you better do the same here. Yes, sir.
Pat, when you win the Republican nomination, how do you think you'll do debating Bill Clinton?
Oh, we'll put him right in the crossfire, Joe. I think we can do a good job on Bill Clinton. I really do. I think I'm the one candidate, frankly, that can bring home the Perot voters and the United We Stand folks, because I was with them on NAFTA and GATT, and I'm with them on campaign finance reform and cleaning up politics in Washington. And those are their key issues. And so I think that's a real asset in our effort to win this nomination. But I'll tell you, it'll be if you ran against Clinton, we would have not only a Republican Party campaign against the presidency of the United States, but a lot of aspects of a third-party campaign against the president of the United States. Because I could get those working class and those the outsider folks who aren't enthusiastic about either party. You know, when they're out in California signing petitions for that Reform Party, as many were putting my name out there as were putting out Perot's. And I think I could have the best shot at keeping Perot out of this race. And if I got the Republican nomination, I'd go over to that Reform Party and say, look, I'm challenging Ross for this nomination. You guys got to get behind me, otherwise we're going to split our vote. You're going to re-elect Clinton. And you don't want to do that. You get behind me and there'll be no more of these unfair trade deals, and we will clean up politics. And we can get it done with bipartisan support. So we'd have it'd be a different style campaign, different campaign. Yeah.
Do you think white water is going to be a big campaign issue?
I think it is now.
What's behind it, really?
Well, it's, you know, they're hiding something up there. Made 130 trips into that office after poor Vince Foster took his life, and you know, they're running it all over, you know, and you know, and they're not fighting like that and defending those things. That's what I remember. I remember George Will said that during Watergate. We're up there, and he said about Nixon. He said, "Listen, Richard Nixon's not fighting like a wounded puma to defend those tapes because they're going to exonerate him." You know, and I think the same thing's going on here. There is something in that thing, in those notes. I don't know what it is, and I think what you're going to have is a collision. And my guess is they're going to force this fellow to hand over those notes. You've got about a bunch of White House aides who happen to be lawyers, you know, laying out the case with the lawyers. This isn't attorney-client privilege. It doesn't extend to everybody on your staff who goes tells a lawyer something. So I think they're liable to win that battle in the courts, and it'll go up very fast to the Supreme Court. And Clinton's starting to be hurt again by it because it's in the news and it all says cover-up. It smells of cover-up. The trouble with Whitewater and why people don't get interested, you know, I opened the New York Times. They got 8 pages of financial facts and all the rest of it. To me, it's just a bore. You got to have something, you know, it got interesting when Hillary made $100,000 with $1,000. Now, I understood that. You know, I don't understand the rest of this stuff that's going on. You know? And I think a lot of folks don't. Madison, Whitewater, and all that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'd like to go back to your statement about the trade deficit.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think that the trade deficit between us and Japan is the result of our consumers' behavior? That they prefer to buy Japanese cars rather than an American car because of their quality?
Mm-hmm.
And if our industrialists can satisfy our consumers that the quality of the cars produced today here in the United States are better than Japanese cars, you are automatically cutting down that deficit.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no doubt that the Japanese cars are high-quality cars, and they're very much fewer defects than American cars. And many of us that bought American cars in the 70s know that Detroit fell down on the job, management and labor. And the Japanese have taken advantage of that. But let me say this. You know, the Japanese don't sit out there in, where they get together in that harbor in Tokyo Bay, they get that little island out there, they go out there and party. They don't go out there and talk about free trade principles. They go out and talk about winning a war. And I think they're targeting American industries as effectively as the Japanese targeted Pearl Harbor. They started making good radios and good TVs. They kept their own market very closed to that. Their culture keeps it closed. And they produced them and they used the profits from that, undercut American radios and TVs and cameras. Then they flood the American market and take them down and destroy them and put them out of business. So we don't make any more. They tried that with Harley Davidson when I was in Reagan's White House. Harley Davidson was having a very rough time. Japanese had something like 90% of our motorcycle market. So they got these big bikes, which were very good, and they started selling them in the United States below what it cost them to make them. The purpose was to kill Harley Davidson so it would never come back. And so Reagan put a 50% tariff on Japanese big bikes because they were dumping. And he let it phase out over 5 years. Harley Davidson came back, it's exporting, it survived, it's doing well. Now that's the kind of policy I think we need. The idea that we're dealing with a free trade country and dealing with the Japanese is, I think, a mistake. They are adversarial traders. They look upon, they look upon our markets and target them to take them out because they want those jobs and they want that manufacturing base and they want the technology that goes with it. And the idea that this is sort of a free trade relationship, it seems to me it's a mistake to consider it that. And you know, I look at Reagan's, when I was in the White House. Now Reagan was the great free trader, an exponent of free trade, and I was too in the White House. But if you look back, Reagan imposed tariffs on motorcycles and saved Harley Davidsons. He put a quota on steel, and now American steel industry came back and we got these mini steel mills make the highest quality steel in the world. He put a quota on automobiles, and Ford, they all came back, the automobile industry. So the Japanese were not allowed to take them out. He demanded they buy 20% of their semiconductors from the U.S. They did. Our industry's thriving again. Machine tools, put quotas on those. They came back. In other words, you had a strong executive, when he saw some facet of the national interest as he saw it, that overrode his belief in, quote, free trade when he realized we weren't dealing with free traders. And you need that. We can't, you know, all we're doing when we say free trade, only one government's abdicating from fighting for the interests of its own manufacturers, and that's the American government. And so that's not going to be the policy when I get there. All right. Thank you all very much. We appreciate it.